I'm not a violent man. At least, I never considered myself to be violent. Hell, talk to anyone who knew me growing up and they'll tell you the same thing. I'm one of the least confrontational guys you'll ever come across. It's just not in my nature, they'll say. And until recently, they'd be right. But things change. People change. Most of the time it's gradual, occurring steadily over the years, compounding with life experiences, good and bad. In some cases, people can change a lot, and it can happen in a single, powerful moment. You can never plan for a moment like that. Most of the time, you never even get a chance to brace for it. It just happens, and in an instant, you're just, I'm sorry. This is where words truly fail me. I've been trying to articulate them in some form since, well, I guess there's no getting around it. Because when the moment came for me, it didn't just change me. It broke me. Broke my mind, my body, my soul, and hell, whatever else you want to throw in. I can never be the gentle, caring man I once was. Even if you were to give me a magic wand that would somehow make me that man again, I wouldn't use it. Who I am now, who I've become, there really is no going back. And honestly, I don't want to go back. But how I got to this point and how that moment unfolded, that's actually only one part of the story. The other part, the far more critical part if I'm being honest, that's what inspired me to share this. It's also why I'm choosing to share this around the Thanksgiving holiday. That may or may not be appropriate given what certain aspects of my story entails, but I'm choosing to do so because I spent the past year digesting how my life unfolded. And that might be a very poor choice of words given the circumstances, but I'm not taking it back. If you believe you have the stomach for what I'm about to share, then by all means, listen on. And if you later regret it as you're sitting down to Thanksgiving dinner, well, don't say I didn't warn you. But before I get to those nauseating details, I need to offer an appetizer of sorts. Because that gentle, soft-spoken man I was before could never have imagined the horrors I've witnessed, let alone experienced them. My circumstances just made them seem unthinkable. I was born in such a comfortable, insulated community. Think big houses, big lawns, clean streets, and little conflict of any kind. Being the youngest of two siblings, I was coddled for the most part. I knew only comfort and contentment for much of my youth. So naturally, I was fairly meek compared to other boys. I actively avoided fights, and I was quite averse to violence of any kind that didn't involve cartoon characters. I rarely even raised my voice in an argument, and if things ever did get hostile, I would be the first to take a step back and de-escalate the situation. Now call those traits anything you want. More than one person has called me a pussy. Some are a bit more polite about it. Now while I wouldn't say they were entirely accurate in their assessment, I honestly wouldn't blame them for holding such opinions. But I guess growing up in such an affluent setting did plenty to blind me from the horrors of the real world. It probably didn't help that I remained in my hometown even after I graduated high school. Unlike my siblings, I just had no desire to leave and see the outside world. I ended up enrolling in a local trade school, working as a contractor for a time with my uncle. Then I became a mechanic who specialized in fixing old cars. It seemed to fit my personality, building things from lesser parts, repairing what was broken and turning it into something better. It wasn't just good money and stable work. It played a part in me meeting the love of my life, Clara. And I suppose this is where I made myself truly vulnerable. Because when you love someone so completely, when you make them the center of your world and a part of your soul, You essentially put the world around you on notice. You're telling God and fate and everything in between that here it is. Here's your greatest weakness. Break this, and it breaks you. Now, don't take that to mean that I regret meeting Clara. I don't care to share the intimate details of how we met, how we fell in love, and the elaborate lengths I went to on our wedding day. Because I know if I try, I wouldn't be able to hold it together. All you need to know is that our love was real. Our love was strong. We knew, even before we got married, that we wanted to grow old and gray together. Like me, she'd grown up in the same neighborhood. She also abhorred violence as much as I did. She would even get queasy at the mere sight of blood. But Clara was still a lot stronger than me. She might have been reluctant to engage in hostilities of any kind, but she was never afraid of anything. That's just one of the many things I loved about her. Sadly, it also played a part in what happened to her. Forgive me, but this part of my story still pains me. The memories alone fill me with equal amounts of sorrow and rage. Because what happened to her? What happened to our child? No one deserves such a terrible fate, especially not her. It happened a couple weeks before Thanksgiving. Our daughter had just turned 5. We were making our usual holiday preparations. I volunteered to assist with decorations, which was not unusual, and she was volunteering at our daughter's school. They were even preparing a special luncheon that involved members of the city council, as well as a few officials from upstate. It was actually a big deal locally. Many important, well-connected people lived in this community. And my wife, who worked as a legal aid for some of them, she was quite well regarded. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have known, is that these powerful individuals were targets for some very dangerous people. In fact, one of the main guests of honor for the luncheon was a district attorney. His name escapes me, but even if I recalled, I don't think I could share it. Not without my emotions getting the better of me. But he, whether knowingly or unknowingly, he put my wife in danger just by being near her. He had recently won a closely contested re-election. And he won that election by parading his record against hardened criminals, the kind who occupied the less savory parts of our region. Me being so insulated, I had no idea such monstrous people existed within a 2-hour drive of my home. But they were always there, and they were not happy that this man had won. So, a few of them who happened to have just the right connections hatched a plot. A couple of ruthless hitmen would attack the DA after the luncheon, take him hostage, and educate him on the risks of undermining certain operations. But it was never supposed to turn into such a horrific act. And my wife, our daughter, they just had to linger at that luncheon for a bit longer. My wife, who had worked in this man's office for a number of years, she just had to go the extra mile, offering to help while they planned their upcoming holiday party. I guess she was just too kind for this world. Because when those men pulled up in their van, when they saw the DA about to enter his car, well, their initial plan did not go accordingly. Now, I have to be careful here, and not just because it's so difficult for me to recall, but the events that unfolded have only been surmised through extensive forensic scrutiny. But I know my wife better than anyone. I know how she carried herself in tense situations. So I can say with certainty that when these men attacked, she tried to stop them. She tried to get help. She tried to protect our daughter. But these men, these sick, twisted, pitiful excuses for human beings, They decided she'd seen too much. They also decided that the DA was being too difficult. What they did to him, what they did to my wife and daughter. I don't care how hardened you think you are. I saw the photos. I saw the police reports of what they did to them. I've shed so many tears. I've yelled, cried, and screamed every kind of anguish you can imagine. But no words could possibly do justice to that feeling. That feeling that comes when you confront the true depravity of humanity. A detective and a couple of FBI agents later told me my wife and daughter were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Those weren't their exact words. They were trying to dress it up, pretending the universe wasn't exceptionally cruel to them, to me, to all that is good and decent. They called it an extortion plot that became a gruesome murder. It briefly made national news. It also triggered a massive manhunt for the culprits. But for me, that was only a secondary concern. As you can imagine, I was not the same man after this unspeakable tragedy. Yes, the community was horrified, and they all rallied to comfort, support, and aid me. I wish I could say I was grateful, but if I'm being honest, their sympathy felt hollow, and their compassion, it felt so muted. After seeing what remained of the bodies of my family, after attending their funeral, I just could not cope. I could not process this. I was permanently broken. The mere thought of moving forward didn't just seem arduous, it was impossible. But I wasn't about to jump headfirst into a pit of despair. I needed to do something. I needed some kind of, closure might have been asking for too much, but at the very least, I needed vindication. I needed to know that whoever did this to my family, they would suffer. And no, I'm not just talking about a lengthy prison sentence. What I wanted for these monsters, I don't think I could ever describe, not without tapping into a darkness inside me that is best left contained. But even that might have been hoping for too much. Because before I buried what was left of my wife and daughter, the FBI agents tempered those expectations. One explained to me that these hitmen weren't your run-of-the-mill thugs. They were associates of an organized criminal enterprise, as they called it. And apparently, whenever powerful criminals wanted to send a message, they prefer to outsource it. And the two individuals suspected of carrying out this atrocity, they were no strangers to law enforcement. One was already suspected of multiple murders, including 2 cops. The other had been a high-ranking member of a prison gang. Now, how he got out, the agents wouldn't tell me. But this rather twisted individual had been quite active for a number of organizations, a number of which had taken quite a hit due to recent crackdowns by law enforcement. What happened to the DA had been the boldest to date. It had also been the most foolish. The FBI claimed that these men couldn't hide for long. They would be caught and brought to justice. One agent even promised me a front row seat at their trial. But I didn't want a trial. I didn't even want justice. I wanted blood. So you can imagine my outrage when the trail for these two went completely cold. That promise the FBI made, it might as well have been a wet fart disguised as words. For a while, I pestered them relentlessly for updates. But after a few months, they stopped answering. But as upset as I was, I won't say those agents were completely inept. Before they ghosted me, one agent let slip a bit of information that I doubt he intended to share. It involved this sleepy little town called Huntwood, and perhaps I was always bound to end up there sooner or later. And thanks to this slip-up, it was going to be sooner. But finding Huntwood and learning its secrets, that turned out to be a 6-month endeavor. It cost me a great deal of time, money, and mental anguish. I'm pretty sure I alienated a good chunk of my friends and family along the way. but none of them dared to stop me. I doubt they could have if they tried. I won't bore you with how I went about finding Huntwood or learning its checkered history. All you really need to know is that this cozy little enclave had an important purpose. Years ago, back during the heyday of the American Mafia, a group of gangsters decided they needed a place to go when the heat was on them. So, they found this backwater farming town called Huntwood and invested into making it this haven of sorts. Over the span of a couple decades, they turned it into this affluent, upper-class community that you'd be hard-pressed to find on a map. And even if you'd stumbled into it by accident, you'd never know it was anything special. But therein lies the beauty/horror of Huntwood. It's meant to be quiet, insulated, and comfortable. But unlike the town where I grew up, the people in Huntwood included some of the sickest, most deranged human beings you'll ever come across. Walk down Main Street in the middle of the day, and chances are you'll cross paths with a killer, a conman, a human trafficker, or some other pitiful excuse for a human being. How it operated, how it managed to stay under the radar for so long, I still don't know that, and honestly, I didn't really care. All that mattered to me was that the monsters who killed my wife and child, they were probably there, waiting for the heat to die down. The idea of them still breathing free air, it filled me with such disgust and hatred. I didn't care if I had to fight my way through every criminal living in Huntwood. I was going to find them. I was going to get my hands on them. And I was going to... Oof. There it is. There's that darkness again. I really need to keep it contained just for a bit longer. Because, as ambitious as I was, I still wasn't very good at violence. I didn't put much thought into how I would go about finding these two, especially in a town full of criminals with a strong incentive to stay hidden. I tried formulating a plan during the 11-hour drive to Huntwood. Despite only having a gun and a combat knife with me, and minimal experience on wielding either, I was still going in blind, stupid, and out of my element. There were any number of ways this could have ended very badly for me. But how it ended up playing out, that's where things took an unexpected twist. Because by fluke or fate, I arrived in Huntwood the day before Thanksgiving. I had already come to associate this once cheerful holiday with the atrocity that befell my family, so I was hardly in a festive spirit. I barely even noticed the decorations lining the streets of Huntwood. I just worked under the assumption that everyone I saw was a criminal hiding from some horrific crime. Every friendly face, every welcoming smile, I paid them no mind. Not when I rented a motel room, not when I put gas in my car, not even when I walked past a local church holding a bake sale. I spent that entire first day just getting a feel for Huntwood, learning the streets, gauging the mood, and looking for signs of anyone trying to keep an extra low profile. Me not being a detective or some skilled vigilante, I had many forces working against me. I doubt I hid my intentions particularly well. I tried asking around. I tried eavesdropping on a few conversations I thought were relevant, which didn't lead to much. In fact, I'm pretty sure these two men at a park almost called the cops on me. And that would have been a sad, if not pathetic, way to end my first day in Huntwood. But at that same park, there was this strange incident that changed the nature of my visit. As the sun was setting, I noticed this figure in a hoodie anxiously rush past me. He looked agitated compared to everyone else. He wouldn't take his hands out of his pockets. He kept looking over his shoulder, as if he thought someone was following him. Naturally, I became intrigued, but I was quickly disappointed when I saw his face. He was not the man I was looking for. But I kept on watching him because he did not carry himself like most everyone else in Huntwood. He kept walking up to strangers, mostly men walking their dogs or women watching their children play. I even got close enough to hear him at one point. "Please, I need your help. Can I borrow your phone? I think someone's after me." Now, there are any number of ways to react to such a strange encounter. I certainly wouldn't have blamed these people if they just ran away or yelled for the nearest cop. But the people of Huntwood, their response was not typical. They would just look at this anxious man, laugh and shake their head. Even the women with children, they didn't look the least bit threatened by him. One of them even patted him on the shoulder and told him to have a happy Thanksgiving. That got a rather tense reaction from the man. Eventually, he ran off and I lost him in some trees. But while I was trying to process this strange situation, a rather large, heavy-set individual bumped into me as he walked by. I was a bit taken aback by his size, but he simply turned to me and gave me this strange yet friendly look.
Sorry about that, partner. I'm in a bit of a hurry. You should be too. Tomorrow's Thanksgiving. That's a very special day here in Huntwood.
I don't remember what I said to him. I just remember that grin of his. A wide, toothy grin that was stained with what I thought was barbecue sauce. I didn't have a time to look closer, so I just walked off, anxious to continue my search. Even after the streets became clear and quiet, I kept on looking. I guess I thought if the sadistic pricks who killed my family were here, then they'd only come out at night, like the monsters they truly were. Yeah, I admit I wasn't thinking all that clearly. Between the lack of sleep and missing meals, I was pretty beat. The fact that tomorrow was Thanksgiving, that didn't even cross my mind. But I guess that made what happened next kind of fitting in a twisted sort of way. It was just after midnight. I was still driving around West Huntwood. And at some point, just past this gas station, I fell asleep at the wheel. One moment I'm just riding along, the next I hear this loud bang, followed by the screech of my tires. Everything around me shake, and for a few seconds, I'm like a rag doll in a blender. Eventually, my car ends up at an awkward angle over a curb. A tire blown out, a damaged muffler, and brakes that are completely shot. The damage wasn't major, but it definitely woke me up. Wasn't seriously injured, and honestly, I was kind of disappointed at the time. I remember looking at my head in the rearview mirror, seeing this large visible bruise on my cheek despite the airbag. And then in that moment, I admit, a part of me hoped I'd die in that crash. Maybe then, I'd see my wife and daughter again. I'd felt pretty low before, but this was a different kind of low. I don't know how long I just lingered in my car. I didn't expect anyone to call for help. I honestly didn't want them to. Then, this large van with a cartoon pig on the side pulled up. Would you know it? That same heavyset man from earlier stepped out.
Wee-wee. You okay there, partner? Looks like you're having a rough day.
I don't remember responding with gratitude. I might have even told him to just light my car on fire and let me burn. He laughed at that. He really did have a twisted sense of humor. And I still don't know how he convinced me to accept a ride. He owned a butcher shop right around the corner. He said he'd finished his last delivery when he came by my wreck. He even offered to call a buddy of his who could fix my car up after Thanksgiving. I would have been content if that's all he offered, but once we got back to his butcher shop, he made a strange request.
Well, since it's officially Thanksgiving, why don't you sit down and have a proper meal with me? Looks like you need it.
I was inclined to refuse, but then my stomach growled. I'd been surviving on food from gas stations and rest stops all week. The idea of any meal that wasn't wrapped in plastic seemed so appetizing. So I didn't bother arguing. This big, imposing man seemed quite eager to show some hospitality. Me being suspicious of everyone in Huntwood, I still hesitated. But as I followed him into the back of his shop and watched him set up a makeshift dinner table, I let my guard down. Maybe I was just too tired and hungry. Even so, there was just something about this man that seemed off. I kept that to myself as I watched him open this big industrial refrigerator. He then takes out these oddly shaped cuts of meat. I'm not a butcher, so I didn't recognize it at first. But as the man prepares it, he starts whistling to himself. Even makes a little small talk, which eventually turns into something else entirely.
You know, it's funny. Folks used to see Huntwood as this strange, mysterious town that only attracts certain kinds of people. And yeah, that's still true, but not like before. How it came to be, we can't change that. But what Huntwood has become, well, I like to think I've done my part.
As he's talking, he starts cooking this mystery meat. I don't know how he goes about preparing it, but my God, it smelled incredible. I hadn't smelled meat that delicious since my wife's last home-cooked meal. My stomach starts growling louder, and the man just keeps talking.
It kind of reminds me of a sermon I heard at church a while back. Put a lot of evil souls in a small area, and eventually they're going to attract something they don't expect. Take this incident from last week. A couple of fellas get into a fight with a moving company. Before then, these two have been keeping to themselves. So much so that ain't nobody really notices them, even though they've been living in Huntwood for nearly a year. They used to feel so safe here. Then, something changes. Something or someone really has them spooked. And they wanted to move out. Almost like they were on the run or something.
He said that so casually, but my ears definitely perked up. These two guys he mentioned. Could it really be them? I mean, that would have been the mother of all coincidences. Were I not injured and dazed, I might have stopped him right then and there. But instead, I kept listening, and he keeps on cooking. The smell of that meat getting better by the second.
There was a time when folks like them came to Huntwood and never had a reason to leave. Folks like them, who do unspeakable, horrible things, see our cozy little town as a haven. And maybe it was one years and years ago, but now it ain't nothing of the sort. Those two fellas found that out the hard way. Because the moving company they picked a fight with, it was owned by a friend of a friend. And when he mentioned who those two fellas were, it caught the attention of the last person in Huntwood they wanted to piss off.
My brain was still trying to make the connections, but at this point, the man had finished cooking the meat. He then served it up on this nice glass platter, complete with some dinner rolls and a side of mashed potatoes he'd warmed up in a toaster oven. It still didn't look like any meat I'd ever seen before, but it looked so good. I must have made a strange face because the man grinned as he served me an extra large plate. He was also oddly formal when he sat down across from me, having made a plate for himself. And as he cuts into it, he finishes his story.
Those two fellas got a visit later that night. They encountered someone they thought they could threaten or intimidate. One even let slip that they had powerful friends, and they'd willingly killed for those friends before. They were so willing that one time, they even killed this innocent woman and her daughter just by being near a target. But that did nothing to scare the visitor. Hell, that just got him excited. And maybe even a little hungry.
The man then pours some barbecue sauce on the meat. He then takes a big bite. And the way he savors it, the way his face contorts as he chews, it was disturbing how much he enjoyed it. That's when it all snapped into place. That's when my gut and my brain finally got on the same page. I looked down at the plate of food in front of me. This big slab of perfectly cooked meat. Did it really belong to one of those two men? Was this all that remained of them? Did the man sitting across from me find them, kill them, and eat them? A less broken man might have been disgusted, but me, I ended up cutting off a chunk of the meat, holding it up on the end of my fork, and just staring at it for a moment.
Fellas like that, monsters who bring evil to a place like Huntwood, they tend to attract forces that don't much care for that kind of evil. These folks were just extra unlucky, because some of those forces can sense their evil. Some even know how downright delicious it tastes.
Everything the man said after that, I honestly don't care to share. I'll only say that this man and I had a very nice Thanksgiving that night in Huntwood. I even found myself having seconds. It was, without a doubt, the most delicious and satisfying meal I've ever had. I then offered to pay the man for his hospitality. I even tried to help him do the dishes after our meal was complete. He politely refused, and we soon parted ways on friendly terms. What transpired the following morning, the arrangements I made in light of what I now know, those details aren't important. What matters is, I had Thanksgiving with a cannibal. I tasted the flesh of 2 sadistic killers who took my wife and daughter from me. And that man was right. It tasted delicious.